Thanks for joining our mayor's podcast, Breaking It Down. I'm Phyllis Dickerson, the CEO of the African American Mayors Association, and my co-host for today is Mayor Van Johnson, the mayor of the great city of Savannah, Georgia.
Yes.
Thank you, Van.
I'm just glad to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about climate change and the effects on the Black community.
With who?
With the
Who?
The
who?
Mayor Latoya Cantrell
Of
from
what?
the great city of New Orleans, Louisiana.
Nolans?
Nolans. Thanks for
Thank
joining
y'all.
us, Mayor Cantrell.
This is great. So I am told that this is about breaking it down.
Breaking it down.
All the way
All
down.
the way down. And I appreciate your leadership, my brother mayor, and of course, our CEO of the African American Mayors Association. Thank you so much.
So, for us as Black people, other people say climate change and we really don't know what they're talking about. So, like I'm from Arkansas, and in some places in cities across the state, you may be driving and then you smell this smell and you're like, what is that? And the people that live there are like, oh, that's just the paper mill, because they just used to smelling it, right? But they don't know that is the environment changing and those kind of chemicals in the air. So kind of define for us, break it down for us, what is climate change?
So climate change, from my perspective, is because of the toxins, pollutants, greenhouse gas emissions, and the like, it has really had an impact on our environment. In the city of New Orleans, I can just say, when we think about our coastline, we're on the coastline, we're on the front lines of climate change. We are losing a football field of water a day when it comes to our wetlands. And so our barrier islands that were once in place that would protect our city and other coastal cities around us is now being destroyed because of, one, we're losing. Sea level rise is real, as well as we're sinking. So, the ground is sinking and the sea is rising, the water is rising. And so the barrier islands are no longer there to protect us from hurricanes, for example. And so it puts us closer to the danger. And so that is an immediate impact of climate change when you're sinking and the water, is rising, and you don't have those protections that you used to have. And that's because climate is changing. And it's those types of impacts. So every area, for example, can see the impacts differently. So in some areas you have where droughts are occurring. You hear California and the like. But New Orleans, we don't have an issue with water. We have a lot of it. It's coming in. And so, or, fires in California or real devastation. But also in New Orleans, but we're now seeing tornadoes. And we didn't have that. That was not a part of something that we prepared ourselves for. But let me tell you, we have seen them in the past couple of years. And the state of Louisiana had more than ever before this year, coming out of 2022. So it affects us in so many different ways. But in the city that I live, it's really about making us much more vulnerable to hurricanes and now other areas of climate. Water is coming faster. Rain bombs, they come fast. When they come, you get too much water at any given time. When it's not draining fast enough, you flood. So you flood due to rainwater, and that is, having an impact on your property, on your homes, of course, and your vehicles, and on your life, depending on how fast that water rises. So it's many ways that it impacts us, and we do have to pay attention.
As the mayor of an East Coast city such as Savannah, which is on the Atlantic Ocean, we've noticed and probably been the beneficiary of less Atlantic hurricane activity. But we've noticed it's shifted to the Gulf, where the water is warmer, and you have really these larger, more sustained hurricane events. And yet there are people, even in the government sometimes, who says that climate change is not real. What do you say to them?
I don't know how they can say that it's not real, because every day we see the impacts of it. Our government, for example, in terms of who you're saying, some folks within our federal government are saying these things. However, the federal spend due to disasters has increased significantly. So we have real examples, life examples, the loss of life, the loss of property. It's something that you cannot ignore. It is real and it is here. The climate has already changed. So it's not about it's changing, it's changed. And we have to do a better job of adapting to living, like for New Orleans, it's about adaptation, adapting to living with water. That's what we have to do where we live, because again, it's not going away. The rain is coming faster, harder, and it's not just, we don't have to wait for a hurricane. And we have to be able, we have to adapt. We have to make sure that when we lose power, when we had Hurricane Ida over a year ago, we had a hurricane late August during a historic heat wave. So it's hot already. You have the hurricane, a heat wave is going on. I lost 11 senior citizens in my city who were living in independent living facilities, right? And you have standards for nursing homes, meaning you're checking them, you're making sure everybody's ready. But in private living, facilities, the owners are really responsible for that. Now, since then, we've passed legislation, worked with the council to pass legislation to build in greater accountability. But when that heat wave came, and then folks could not be contacted, meaning those who were responsible for protecting our seniors were out of there, but our seniors were left there, and we were without electricity in many areas up to 2 weeks. You see, so this is real. So what we had to do, even in that moment, we had to think outside the box. Hurricane, heat wave. We activated our buses, our regional transit authority. We made them cooling centers, put them out in neighborhoods, picked up people, brought them to our rec centers. We activated our rec centers as cooling centers as well. We had buses for pets only, things like that. But you know what? We began to prepare ahead of time. A year before Ida hit, the city had moved forward with activating our rec centers with transfer switches, so that they can hook up generators at any given time when you need to utilize your facilities to help your people, meet people where they are. You know what? Thank God we did, because it was those rec centers that we immediately turned to activate them as cooling centers so people can eat and cool off and charge their phones and the like. But this is how we have to prepare ourselves. In our environment, we have to know our existing conditions where we live. Everyone's environment is different based on the geography of where they are in the country and really in the world. But when you learn about it and you get educated about it, then it helps you adapt to the changes that are happening and that are not slowing down.
How do you keep that in front of the face of your state and your federal government? Because I noticed that, for our city, something had happened, and then where everybody's there, and then everybody goes on to the next thing. How this is something that I'm sure it's on your mind every day, that a rain bomb can come, all those things. How do you keep that in the face and keep that active in the minds of those representing you in the state and federal level?
Sure. So one, we have a real robust partnership with our State Office of Homeland Security. And in the city of New Orleans, it's all about us being prepared to respond. You can't wait, So emergency preparedness is something that we focus on every single day. One of the tools that we learn from the community that they trust so much from our city is a NOLA Ready system, and it's an alert system that we send out in real time information. We have over 288,000 residents that are now signed up on it, but we push that number, text NOLA Ready to 777-295, in the event of emergency or not, but just to continue to register yourself. But the community has said that that is the most trusted tool. So now we've built this tool, but one that they trust. So when the information goes out, they react and respond, and they trust the information. So that civic trust is critical to building in, one, a preparedness plan as well as a response plan. So every day it has to be on the minds of your people within city government. So I have an Office of Homeland Security. It's fully staffed. It's our EOC, Emergency Operations Center. And so it's something that we do not let up on. We plan for hurricane season year round. So as soon as hurricane season is over, November 30, December 1, bam, after action. After action, whether you had an event or not. We had something that we did have to or would have had to prepare for. Whether it came through or not is another thing. But you're always in planning mode. And then that just it helps bring your people along. But in addition to that, I think it's about, we have so many projects, infrastructure projects happening in the city that are tied to the federal government, meaning the federal spend. And New Orleans right now is one of the main cities in the country that's spending federal money already prior to the infrastructure investment, which we're trying to, be prepared for. But that has put us kind of ahead of the game with flood mitigation, with green infrastructure and the like. And so people are they can be pissed off about the infrastructure improvements going on. Hey, wait a minute, my route has changed, it's taking me too long, So that's in the what is going on? So that's in their minds.
And it's your fault, but go ahead.
Of course, but it's in their minds. Hey, when I say, this is to protect our city, in terms of green infrastructure, slowing up that water from going into the drains, mitigating that flooding from your home, alleviating those 3 inches of rain. And so the good news is that when the projects are completed, you can immediately see the impact. And that's where people, when they see it, they then trust it as well.
Look what we did. We did this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Exactly. And I remember we did one of our main projects, resiliency, we call it a resiliency district. And it's in key areas. We identify areas that were prone to flooding due to Katrina, held 80% of that water. So you are strategic in where you do your projects. So we went into Pontilly, Gentilly area. It's a system, drainage system that you create using green and you're holding water and bioswales and how you're doing that. And so when we were doing the work, they were mad. What's going on? This is a mess. That rain came. He said, wait a minute. We see the difference. The water is being held.
Look at what we did.
Look at what we did. Because at first, let me tell you, people were like, wait a minute. You're going to have people. I remember before I was a mayor, I was doing in my district and really rebuilding. Before I was a council person, I was a community leader. And I brought forth bioswales for my area, my neighborhood after Katrina. And I remember we were rebuilding our school, one of the 5 in the city that was being rebuilt after Katrina. And I had raised $1 million with Global Green to hold 1 million gallons of water on the campus. People, wait a minute. People are going to be drowning in Broadmoor. You're going to be able to pool back there. And it's like, no, it's no pool.
It's your fault.
It's going to collect that water slow. And guess what? That's when we started bringing people along. So now as mayor, it's really refreshing because as you bring people along, you get the buy-in, and that's what it's all about.
And so what people normally don't know about is the economic impact that it can have on your tourism. And so I remember a few years ago, the Deltas were in New Orleans and the storm came and then they had to flee. Mm-hmm. And so talk about from an entertainment and that was a great tourism standpoint, how climate really affects your dollars that come into your city.
Oh, your bottom line. And especially if you are a destination city like New Orleans is. We would have up to 19 million people a year. So yes, When a storm is coming, we know hurricane season every year, June 1, November 30. So when we have events, one you mentioned, that came, around that summer month, and we get rain, that afternoon shower, it came on, and something was approaching us, an event, a weather event. And we had to sound that alarm. This is what's happening. And they canceled and left. But that's money. It's money not only to your city, but how it impacts the people that are coming to your city as well. So the economic impact is significant, but that's why you can justify the investment and why it's necessary for us to do the road work, the street work, the green infrastructure, so that we can mitigate these events in our city so that you don't have to leave and you can shelter in place.
So since this show is about breaking it down, we always call out FEMA's name, but people don't really know what FEMA is until something happens, and then they're like, what does that mean to me?
Sure.
So explain to us the importance of FEMA when you have that natural disaster.
Well, listen, the Federal Emergency Management Agency is critical, FEMA. Now, FEMA is not what it used to be, meaning the event can come, but depending on the amount of damage determines when FEMA kicks in. It's not an automatic.
And the mayor can't just call them, right?
And the mayor cannot just call them. But when you prepare yourselves as best you can, when you are aware of what's coming your way, these certain types of events, you can get a warning. Some you don't, earthquakes and the like. But in my environment, we're talking about, I know when it's coming. I have the National Weather Service is embedded in my EOC. We have embraced a weather STEM, where we have satellite posts throughout our city, and we're able to, and the residents are able to online go on and see whether it's a storm that hit, where's the lightning happening, how is there chemical in the air, it's all of these things. So it really helps you prepare. So, but I tell you, when you don't have a certain level of damage, then that determines whether or not FEMA will kick in. But because the federal government has been responding to so many natural disasters in our country, FEMA and our Secretary Mayorkas, who was over Homeland Security, he has taken notice and he is bringing forth changes within the FEMA organization so that they can respond in ways that they haven't before, but also understand that sometimes you just can't be, you don't know what's coming. So I think it's forcing the federal government to even change. We're going to see some changes in FEMA coming. I think that will be better able to activate resources on the ground, trust your organizations a little bit more on the ground so you can give them that money so that they can help people, be less of who's going to do what with the money in terms of thinking they're going to do wrong, and just embrace that people are going to do right. And I think that those changes are really being embraced by FEMA.
I know, Mayor, a hallmark of your administration has been about equity. And we know that climate change affects people differently, the effects of climate change. What have you been able to do to kind of make sure that when we're talking about lifting all boats, that we're addressing issues? I mean, certainly from Katrina, we saw how, and Rita, how some communities were hit differently, and they're still trying to get back. So how is that journey going, and how have you used your office to be able to make sure that equity is achieved in addressing this?
Sure. So your most vulnerable people prior to a disaster are going to be the hardest hit, no matter what. That includes your seniors too. And so we do have to be intentional about focusing on those areas, those census tracts, those neighborhoods, because you have to know that they're going to be hit and hurt the hardest and feeling it where they are. So you start preparing for that. You make sure that you identify those rec centers in those areas, so that you can make sure that cooling center is there, or that's, that safe area is there, or the shelter in place center is there. So you use the data, knowing your people, to activate your resources. And you do that ahead of time. You don't wait. And so those are some of the things that the city of New Orleans has been able to do. Again, learning, lessons learned, but also being intentional about where you put that investment. And Katrina taught us a great deal. Who took on that 80%, of water? And it doesn't mean that it's going to be there the same, but if you take notice, but then you also look at where you're putting your infrastructure dollar to. What neighborhoods are you targeting to hold that water? And so when I mentioned in Gentilly and Pontilly, that was one of the areas that we went in and spent millions, and we've over 145 million on creating these resiliency districts throughout our city, in only those areas that were impacted the greatest. In my neighborhood that I led through recovery after Katrina was one of them. We were considered the bottom of the bowl, and we were one of the last to get the water. But when we got the water, it stayed with us for 3 weeks in our homes, and we had over 9 to 12 feet of water. But that was that neighborhood that I made sure that we held water moving forward. Our library was rebuilt. That's holding 25 million gallons of water. So again, just being intentional. I think that is the key. Knowing your people, which is knowing the data, and putting the dollars where the dollars are supposed to be to help mitigate any hardship or burdens on people. That also speaks to evacuation. Okay. And this is where the storms are coming faster. We used to be, our mark for our contraflow in terms of getting people out, 72, hour 72 is when you activate it. These storms that we've had in the past several years, it's a tropical storm, hour 12, and then it turns into a hurricane. You don't have hour 72 any longer. So that's another thing that FEMA is having to reassess, because we do not have the time that we used to have to get our people out.
And sometimes we don't have the money to evacuate. Evacuate where?
Yeah. And then, hey, don't come by me. Meaning we had where different parishes in our state didn't want us to come, And we saw even after Katrina, people got killed trying to enter, or guns loaded when you tried to walk to an adjacent parish or another state. Oh, not here. So, we really think about how can we, activate resources in a timely manner, and even prior to help people. But it's also educating them on saving money, but also building in ways that we can encourage, maybe put some money and skin in the game to help them save that dollar every year, because hurricane season is coming. And it's a community historically that could stay during a hurricane, But now it's almost, we don't have time to get out, to where you have to shelter in place. So now our plans have shifted to a shelter in place model. We did this after Ida. We had to shelter in place. The time wasn't on our side, and we had to do a post-storm evacuation. We had to get our people out after the storm because we were out of electricity.
How has COVID played into that? I mean, now, I was scared for the same thing. If something comes and we're trying to go somewhere that you really can't go because either people are not there or you're not, we don't want Georgia COVID in Alabama, how did even the thought of that play into it, that now people are just not as welcoming? You have police departments that are short-staffed, and they just don't have the ability, the capacity to take people from surrounding communities.
We experienced this prior to Ida, and I think the storm name was Laura. But that storm hit Lake Charles. It hit Alexandria, outside of New Orleans. Closer, it's in Louisiana, but closer, if you can imagine, closer like you're going to Houston. And they had to evacuate. It tore them apart. And we had parishes that said, no, we don't want you. You know who said, come on? City of New Orleans. We set up the response ourselves without even state-activated resources at the time. But we had to say, come to New Orleans. and we're gonna do all we can to take care of you. We put them in hotels. We had 15,000 people that stayed over a year. Our last folks was out of there maybe 13, 14 months later. So we've lived through it from the side of receiving people, but then even through Ida, we experienced the evacuation during COVID. So the social distancing, we perfected our plan, so to speak, through trial and error by responding during a pandemic. So it is a different level of response, but it went off, without a hitch. But that's the partnerships also with the federal government, tailored with the state, but with teams on the ground that are just ready to be activated and to get things done.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm originally from Little Rock, and during Katrina, we were one of the sites that people evacuated to at my church. And our church kicked in, and I just remember a little boy that was about 3 years old, and I was helping his dad get his Walmart card. And the little boy just sat there. And then all of a sudden, he heard a toddler laugh, and he looked around like he hadn't heard a laugh in a long time. And I noticed it, and his dad said, we were in the Superdome. And it hit me, right, from a mental health piece, even for a toddler. And so when they got ready to leave, I said, are you going to give me a hug? And he literally jumped from the chair into my arms and started laughing. And it scared his father because his father hadn't heard him laugh in weeks, right? And so talk about that mental health piece and how you deal with that in a city that has had devastation after devastation after devastation, and help may or may not be on the way.
Sure, it's a work in progress. Trauma, informed care is essential. And every shock, to your city is a shock to your people. And in many cases, sometimes you don't know how that will affect your people. I remember firsthand, even after Hurricane Katrina, and then here comes Gustav, okay? And my community was just, oh my God, in shock. They were afraid, and they were trauma. It was, they were traumatized. And then as a community, we had to create our own evacuation plan to get our people who wanted to go out, and where this was a neighborhood response. So clearly taking that lesson learned from a community level to now to the mayor's office, because again, that approach, wanting to get and reach out and start the dialogue with your people. That's why, when I talk about these emergency centers or cooling centers and the like, there really are places for your people to go, but it's a place where you can also build community, share the love, laugh, comfort one another through a trying time. And it's something to be said about that. But yes, it's trauma, and we've yet to deal with the impacts of the various traumatic events and the impacts that it's had on people in New Orleans. It's just a fact. We had our mental health hospitals and even adolescent hospitals pre-Katrina that have not returned in the post-Katrina environment. So you talking how has it impacted us? Significantly, and with every shock, it gets worse. But it's a work in progress. And now it's compacted or compounded by other things like the pandemic, for example.
So given that it seems that the season ends, and then it starts right back up again after action, then pre-planning, then to actual season, what's left to be done? What keeps you up at night? What has you worried?
Mm-hmm. One is time, right? I was so glad that we escaped a direct hit in 2022. Wow. But it only takes one. And so it's making sure that you're prepared that next time around, but also the impacts of other things that you're seeing. Tornadoes, which was after hurricane season. So it's not just hurricane season anymore. It's a year-round thing. And so, that those things keep me up at night, and also spending this federal money in a timely manner so it don't miss those deadlines, so that we can get more money to do more infrastructure work to keep our city and our people safe. So a lot of things, but I do, I sleep. I do sleep. You gotta sleep to do the work. But it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
How are you doing?
Thank you for asking. Because I'm traumatized too.
Well, I mean,
Right.
because everything is your fault.
Oh yeah.
Everything that's wrong with everybody's life, somehow or another, it's your fault. And if it goes bad, it's your fault. If it goes good, well, look at what we did together. So, obviously, AAMA is also in recognizing our greatest asset are our members, and that we have a responsibility for each other. And so that's why I wanted to know how.
No, I appreciate that, but I would say, the focus on our mental health is important. It should be a priority, and I think that that's a way where AAMA can plug in. I would even recommend us offering some therapy to our members, those that, you can have an expert work with us, even by Zoom. But seriously.
That would be nice, each of us can get an hour of mental health.
I did one not too long ago for women mayors and women of color, right? In a session. And it was through the Women's Mayors Network, I believe. And so after I did the one in the group, they called me and said, listen, we'll pay for you to have individual. I said, I'm going to take you up on that. I said, I must really need it because I let loose in there. But on a serious note, the times that we're leading in are unprecedented in our lifetime. And it's definitely in our country, but it is around the world. Here yesterday, the Prime Minister of New Zealand said, listen, I don't have the energy. And
Done.
She is bad. I mean,
she's like, I'm done.
Outstanding.
I'm going to get married.
She said, I just don't have the energy.
I'm done.
And the climate is vicious. It seems like public service is under attack. And things are just allowed in ways that they used to not be. And then as a woman and a Black woman, it seems like a lot of things are allowed that didn't used to be, for my male counterparts. And it takes a toll, on you. And it's real. So I would say, thank you for asking. I know that it's okay to not be okay, but also that it's okay for AAMA to meet us where we are and offer those services that I do believe it would be appreciated.
I think that's a good idea.
It is, because what I didn't realize, when you go through seminary, one of the things they tell ministers is to get a counselor. And because you carry the weight of your congregation. And so that's a great point. We don't tell mayors.
And I go a step further. I mean, first of all, you can't trust to have anyone in your community service you. I mean, it's just too much of a risk. And it has to be someone who understands and appreciates the very unique nature of the role.
I felt that. I felt the challenge of finding someone for me to talk to that will not use what I say against me.
Unidentified source says.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then under other pressures, right, of the spin and just the intentional attacks to bring you down. And so that you have to, as they poke the bear, you got to stand up and face it. And not only that, not let them break you down,
She's hard to break down. She's tough. She's tough.
I've watched some of those press conferences. So I go and I spy on mayors. So, kind of see how y'all are doing. So I see they try.
When you see me go off, Lord, because I try. Listen, I don't.
I see the look before I see the go off, and you shift your head, and I say, oh, here it comes.
And calm down, and but those are techniques that could help us, and even in regards to reframing, some of the questions. This is what I learned from one. Like, what in your experience caused you to ask me that question? Just to get a little bit more meat for them to have to say.
Right.
Like, what about me that makes you want to ask that question? Or just, can you explain what you mean by that? So really forcing them to say what they mean. And then sometimes,
Or the blatant disrespect that they would ask you things they would have never asked a male counterparts, or even a white counterpart of any kind. They just would not do it, but then feel so casual with you,
and comfortable.
right, to be able to do that.
Because you're not supposed to be where you are.
And then when you do, then you become the diary of a mad black woman.
Absolutely.
Say, see, I told you.
See, yeah, I told you, Yeah, or people lie on you. Yeah, she cussed me out.
You're like,
no, I didn't. But look, if I did, I said, but don't lie on me, Anyway, thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
And you keep pushing.
Thank you. I like this breaking it down.
There we go.
We need it. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
breaking it down. And when you have trusted leaders that you can rely on to break it down, it really goes even further to the listening audience.
Yes.
So
Thank you again, Mayor Cantrell.
thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.